Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the final record of a civilization's total collapse, and it's a first-hand account from the guy who was both its last general and its final historian.
So get this. This whole thing is a first-person story. We're not just reading some dry history book. We're hearing directly from the man who was commanded to watch and write down the complete and utter destruction of his own people.
But this story doesn't kick off on a battlefield. It actually starts with a young boy who was given this incredibly heavy, lifelong job before he was even a teenager.
Yeah, at just 10 years old, a man named Ammaron basically points at him and says, "You're the one." He saw something special in the kid, describing him as a sober child who was quick to observe. And those two things, his serious nature and his sharp eye, they are going to define his entire life and the record he leaves behind.
Okay, so to really get what's going on here, you have to understand the core conflict. You've got the Nephites and the Lamanites. Now, these were basically two sides of the same family, but they were locked in this endless cycle of war that just consumed their whole society. It's the backdrop for this entire story.
So as his nation is just spiraling deeper and deeper into this conflict, leadership gets thrown onto Mormon's shoulders at an age that is, well, it's pretty hard to believe.
15. I mean, think about that. At 15, when most of us are just trying to figure out high school, Mormon was made the commander-in-chief of his entire nation's armies. And the record says he was picked because he was large in stature, but also because he had that same sober mind he was known for as a little kid.
You know, Mormon's early career as a general shows this incredibly frustrating pattern. It's like a loop. He'd lead his people to a victory, they'd have a little bit of peace, but then, as he puts it, their own wickedness would just drag them right back into another war, over and over again.
Just to give you an idea, in one huge battle, his army of 42,000 actually managed to beat back a bigger force of 44,000. But here's the kicker. These wins on the battlefield, they never actually changed what was going on in the hearts of the people. They were just temporary fixes.
And this is what leads Mormon to this really painful conclusion. He realized that whenever his people felt sad or sorry, it wasn't real repentance. He calls it the sorrowing of the damned, which is basically the frustration of people who can't find happiness in sin anymore, so they just end up cursing God instead.
Okay, so this brings us to a huge turning point. This is where Mormon makes a decision that completely changes his role. He goes from being a major player in history to its main observer. So after one more of these victories, something just snaps. The Nephites, they stop being grateful, and they start to boast in their own strength. They start swearing these oaths of vengeance, completely determined to just wipe their enemies off the map. And this sets up a really tough moral dilemma, right? What do you do when the army you're leading is now just fighting for pure revenge, a motive you've been told is completely wrong?
Well, Mormon's answer was crystal clear. He quit. He flat out refused to be the commander of a people who were no longer fighting to protect their families, but were just out for blood.
So he takes on this new role. He calls himself an idle witness. He's still there, he's still watching everything, and he's still doing his original job of recording it all, but he would no longer lead them. From here on out, he is basically just the historian of their downfall.
But the story isn't over. Years later, with his people on the very brink of being completely wiped out, Mormon is convinced to lead them one last time. But here's the thing, there's no hope of winning. He's basically just agreeing to preside over their end.
And what he does right before this final catastrophic battle tells you everything you need to know about his priorities. He's not focused on military strategy. No, his main concern is preserving the record. He gathers up all the sacred histories, these accounts kept on metal plates, and he hides them away, making sure the story of his civilization would survive, even if the people themselves didn't.
The scale of what happens next is it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. In one final climactic battle, his entire nation is annihilated. He just lists captain after captain who fell with their 10,000 soldiers. We're talking a loss of over 230,000 men in one go.
Mormon himself goes down, wounded, in the middle of all this carnage, but the enemy army just passes right by him, thinking he's already dead. He survives, along with only 24 others, just to wake up and see the silent, complete destruction of his people from the top of that hill.
And his record ends with this absolutely gut-wrenching lament. He's mourning the loss of his people, his fair ones. But his deepest sadness isn't just that they died, but for the choices that got them there.
for rejecting the very God he believed was standing there with open arms, ready to save them.
So that brings us to the biggest question of all, right? After seeing all this horror, after living through it, why write it all down? What's the point of preserving such a monumentally tragic story?
Well, Mormon tells us exactly why. His record was never just meant to be a history book. It was intended to be a warning and a testament. He hoped that the tragic end of his people could somehow persuade all of us, the future readers, to choose a totally different path.
And this is his final message, basically a voice reaching out across time. It's a direct appeal for peace, an end to the bloodshed, and a plea to turn back to God. A message he's desperate for other nations to hear so they don't repeat the same mistakes.
And so, this incredible record of a world's end leaves us with one final, and I think timeless, question to really chew on.